From TruthdigImage by Mr. FishTruthdig. Permission details. DMCA editor's note: Chris Hedges has the day off. Here's a repost of his January 30th column, originally published 10 days after Donald Trump became president. Reality is under assault. Verbal confusion reigns. Truth and illusion have merged. Mental chaos makes it hard to fathom what is happening. We feel trapped in a hall of mirrors. Exposed lies are answered with other lies. The rational is countered with the irrational. Cognitive dissonance prevails. We endure a disquieting shame and even guilt. Tens of millions of Americans, especially women, undocumented workers, Muslims and African Americans, suffer the acute anxiety of being pursued by a predator. All this is by design. Demagogues always infect the governed with their own psychosis. The comparison between totalitarianism and psychosis is not incidental. The psychiatrist Yost A. M. Mirlu wrote in his book The Rape of the Mind: The Psychology of Thought Control, Menticide, and Brainwashing. Delusional thinking inevitably creeps into every form of tyranny and despotism. Unconscious backward forces come into action. Evil powers from the archaic past return. An automatic compulsion to go on to self-destruction develops, to justify one mistake with a new one, to enlarge and expand. The vicious pathological circle becomes the dominating end of life. The frightened man, burdened by a culture he does not understand, retreats into the brute's fantasy of limitless power in order to cover up the vacuum inside himself. This fantasy starts with the leaders and is later taken over by the masses they oppress. The lies fly out of the White House like flocks of pigeons. Donald Trump's election victory was a landslide. He had the largest inauguration crowds in American history. 3 million to 5 million undocumented immigrants voted illegally. Climate change is a hoax. Vaccines cause autism. Immigrants are carriers of tremendous infectious disease. The election was rigged until it wasn't. We don't know who really knocked down the World Trade Center. Torture works. Mexico will pay for the wall. Conspiracy theories are fact. Scientific facts are conspiracies. America will be great again. Our new president, a 70-year-old with orange-tinted skin and hair that Penn Jillette has likened to cotton candy made of piss, is, as Trump often reminds us, very good-looking. He has almost no intellectual accomplishments. He knows little of history, politics, law, philosophy, art or governance, but insists my IQ is one of the highest and you all know it. Please don't feel so stupid or insecure. It's not your fault. And the mediocrities and halfwits he has installed in his cabinet have by far the highest IQ of any cabinet ever assembled. It is an avalanche of absurdities. This mendacity would be easier to repulse if the problem was solely embodied in Trump. But even in the face of a rising despotism, the Democratic Party refuses to denounce the corporate forces that eviscerated our democracy and impoverished the country. The neoliberal Trump demonizes Muslims, undocumented workers and the media. The neoliberal Democratic Party demonizes Vladimir Putin and FBI Director James Comey. No one speaks about the destructive force of corporate power. The warring elites pit alternative facts against alternative facts. All engage in demagoguery. We will, I expect, be condemned to despotism by the venality of Trump and the cowardice and dishonesty of the liberal class. Trump and those around him have a deep hatred for what they cannot understand. They silence anyone who thinks independently. They elevate pseudo-intellectuals who adhere to their bizarre script. They cannot cope with complexity, nuance or the unpredictable. Individual initiative is a mortal threat. The order for some employees of several federal agencies, including the Environmental Protection Agency, the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Research Service, the National Park Service and the Department of Health and Human Services, to restrict or cease communication with the press or members of Congress, along with the attempt to impose 10-year felony convictions on 6 reporters who covered the inauguration protests, signals the beginning of a campaign to marginalize reality and promote fantasy. Facts depend solely on those who have the power to create them. The goal of the Trump administration is to create an artificial consistency that conforms to its warped perception of the world. Before they seize power and establish a world according to their doctrines, totalitarian movements conjure up a lying world of consistency which is more adequate to the needs of the human mind than reality itself, in which is through sheer imagination. Uprooted masses can feel at home and are spared the never-ending shocks which real life and real experiences deal to human beings and their expectations. Hannah Arendt wrote in The Origins of Totalitarianism: the force possessed by totalitarian propaganda before the movements have the power to drop iron curtains to prevent anyone's disturbing, by the slightest reality, the gruesome quiet of an entirely imaginary world lies in its ability to shut the masses off from the real world. Trump's blinding narcissism was captured in his bizarre talk to the CIA on January 21. They say, "Is Donald Trump an intellectual?" he said. "Trust me, I'm, like, a smart persona. I have a running war with the media," he added. "They are among the most dishonest human beings on earth. And they sort of made it sound like I had a feud with the intelligence community. And I just want to let you know, the reason you're the #1 stop in the new presidency is exactly the opposite exactly. And they understand that, too." He launched into an attack on the media for not reporting that 1.5 million people showed up for his inauguration. "They showed a field where there was practically nobody standing there," he said about the media's depiction of the inauguration crowd. "And they said, Donald Trump did not draw well. I said, it was almost raining, the rain should have scared them away, but God looked down and he said, we're not going to let it rain on your speech." He has been on the cover of Time like 14 or 15 times, Trump said in speaking of his criticism of the magazine because one of its reporters incorrectly wrote that the president had removed a bust of Martin Luther King Jr. from the Oval Office. "I think we have the all-time record in the history of Time magazine. Like, if Tom Brady is on the cover, it's one time, because he won the Super Bowl or something, right? I've been on it for 15 times this year. I don't think that's a record, Mike, that can never be broken. Do you agree with that? What do you think?" Editor's note: photographs or drawings of Trump were on the cover of Time 10 times in the last year and a half and once in 1989. Trump's theatricality works. He forces the press and the public to repeat his lies, inadvertently giving them credibility. He is always moving. He is always on display. He has no fixed belief system. Trump, as he consolidates power, will adopt the ideology of the Christian right to fill his own ideological vacuum. The Christian right's magical thinking will merge seamlessly with Trump's magical thinking. Idiocy, self-delusion, megalomania, fantasy and government repression will come wrapped in images of the Christian cross and the American flag. Next page 1-2 Chris Hedges spent nearly 2 decades as a foreign correspondent in Central America, the Middle East, Africa and the Balkans. He has reported from more than 50 countries and has worked for the Christian Science Monitor, National Public Radio, the Dallas Morning News and the New York Times, for which he was a foreign correspondent for 15 years. Hedges was part of the team of Moore. The views expressed in this article are the sole responsibility of the author and do not necessarily reflect those of this website or its editors.